Welcome to The Big Picture. I'm Phil Arno. And unless you've been hiding under a log lately, you might have the idea that things in this country are a little bit divided. The Democrat Party seems to be kind of in disarray. A lot of people are unhappy with President Trump. Not a lot, but a lot of voices are unhappy with President Trump. We'll put that into perspective. But all these things are coming to you through various media sources and the internet, and it's kind of hard to decide what to believe these days. You see things and you gotta question what's going on. And we have answers for that. With me in the studio today is an old friend, Ed Rath, who is basically in on politics. You were a county legislator for many years. You were a state senator. Correct. And now you're in private, private business. And you've been in private business all along, but you still keep your fingers in the overall picture. You know what's going on.
Well, very much so, Phil, and thank you very much for the invitation to join you today in this conversation. And politics and government, public service has been around me my entire life, and my family has been honored to serve across many different generations in public service. I was elected for 15 years, 13 of them as a county legislator and 2 as a state senator. And since 2022, after 2022 rather, when I was no longer elected to the state Senate, I have focused more so on my private sector business. I've been working for various utility companies and energy brokerage and consulting firms for over 30 years. So that's what I'm up to, but very much a student of politics and government, paying very close attention to what's happening both locally, across the state and federally. And you're right. Right now, it is very divided, if you will, within our country. But that division is healthy, provided that it is a structural and a reasonable dialogue back and forth amongst the people. Well, and that's what we've gotten to, is an unreasonableness of a lot of the discourse that's happening right now. And
the exaggeration of complaints on one side just seems to be, grasping at straws. I mean, how bad can we make it seem so that the other guys don't, have any success? And by the other guys, they mean basically people who are being served by the other guys. It seems disingenuous for one political party to say nothing, absolutely nothing is good if it's happening from the other side. That didn't used to be the way it was.
You're right, and it wasn't even that way maybe 5, 7, 10 years ago. People wanted a discourse. They wanted a balanced dialogue. They wanted checks and balances, and they wanted government where both sides of the aisle would debate the issues, and we'd have a conversation as to what the right pathway forward was, and then you'd negotiate, and you negotiate in good faith, and outcomes would be created that were a agreement amongst parties, versus the hyper-partisanship that we're seeing right now in many ways, which the people are turned off by.
And it doesn't serve the good. It doesn't serve the people. It doesn't serve progress. And, when you look at some of the issues that are in the headlines, and you look at the positions, 80% of the country comes down on one side. Like, for instance, should men be competing with women in sports? Should the border be totally open or closed and regulated so that immigration is legal?
Right.
Should crime be clamped down on with law enforcement?
Indeed, at every turn it should be.
Should waste in government be addressed? People over 150 years old getting Social Security. Illegal aliens getting Social Security. Most of the population, on a common sense basis, agrees that these things are worth a look.
You're right, and all those issues that you just mentioned are 80-20 issues, where 80% of the country supports it, 20% of the country don't. And many of them were included in the mandate that President Trump received when he was elected last year, when it comes to securing our border, when it comes to prioritizing law-abiding citizens over criminals and people who have come into our country illegally, when it comes to economic development and job creation, and also the United States in its position on the world stage. When you see see this massive summit that was happening yesterday in Washington, D.C. You see countries coming together because President Trump is able to reach out to Putin, reach out to Zelensky, and create a dialogue for potential peace, something that never would have happened under the previous administration. So that's the mandate that the president has, and it also carries forward into New York State as well as local politics.
Well, let's get into our immediate situation in New York State. You know, Kathy Hochul is supposedly the leader, the governor, who makes decisions and policy. My opinion, only my opinion, I don't think that Kathy Hochul is making any decisions. I think she's there as a figurehead, much like Biden was, you know, when he was president. I think that she's basically being told what to say, when to say it, and where to go and when to go.
Phil, I agree with you totally. And she's carrying out in many ways the progressive agenda from New York City.
And the people who are calling the shots are in the background. They're not accountable. People can't point to somebody and say, this is their doing. They point to Kathy Hochul and they say, this is her doing. And I think if her poll numbers get low enough, the Democrat leaders will turn around and will say, okay, you know what? She can't win. We're going to come up with another candidate, and we're going to put him out there as fresh, with no agenda, and popular, and in this state, that's going to guarantee another Democrat governor.
I think a very important point was a Siena poll in early August, which came out, which showed that Kathy Hochul is still only at 45% approval within her numbers of the Democrat Party. And the potential candidate running against her, Elise Stefanik, who has not even announced her candidacy, is only 14 points behind her and gaining ground already. The point is that she is from upstate. She's from the Albany area. She has been in Congress for many years, and she understands the plight of all of New Yorkers, not just the plight or the concerns or the priorities of New York City progressive Democrats. New York is 50th out of 50 when it comes to regulations and 49th out of 50 when it comes to taxes. And that's an environment for people to leave our state, unfortunately. And I used to make this joke quite often. New York State used to be the Empire State, but now empires are built elsewhere. It's unfortunate, but true.
Yeah, and you know, I've said this on the show before, but you know, a year or more ago, the Business Council of New York came out with a study. And this is a nonpartisan organization, and they came out with a study, and they said that over the past 3 years, New York State has lost almost $1 trillion in assets and services to other states. And that's an astounding figure. This is unsustainable when it comes to the fairness to the people of New York State, because as people and businesses move out, the people who are left bear a higher burden, you know, with electricity costs, and taxes have to go up to make, you know, to make up for the people who've moved away.
And this ties into my private sector business, which is working for energy supply needs for our commercial and industrial customers. Electricity costs are almost 60% higher in New York State than the national average. And what did we see just recently? We saw National Grid impose a 21% rate increase, which is going to equate to roughly $600 a year for their electric consumers across New York State. NYSEG had a 31% rate increase, and even National Fuel had a 19% rate increase. And this is on the backs of ratepayers and taxpayers who can't pay anymore. And we see this dramatically impacting seniors and those over the age of 55 who many times have limited resources and the utilities are charging them more. Why are they raising their rates, Phil? The reason why they're raising their rates is because they have to comply with the New York Climate Act, which was passed in 2019, otherwise known as the New York Green New Deal. And what that is doing is trying to, and it is, decommissioning fossil-based power generation, natural gas, and replacing it with an all-electric initiative from New York State. And this is a very important point to note. We have decommissioned 4.3 gigawatts of fossil-based power generation over the last 6 years and replaced it with just accessible 0.7 gigawatts of renewable energy. What's accessible energy? So what that means is we have taken offline 3.7 million households of electricity needs per year taken offline from natural gas-based power generation and only replace it with 600,000 homes of intermittent renewable power generation. This is a pathway to brownouts. This is a pathway to what's happened in California, where rates have exploded through the roof, and people can't afford this right now in New York State.
Well, and I want to talk to you and tell you in 2026, coming up, just 6 months from now, 7 months from now, you will not be able to build a house or any building less than 7 stories with any gas or coal or any natural fossil fuels as power. You will have to have electric in that building. So if you're going to build a house, you can't have a gas stove or a gas furnace. You're going to have to heat that house. You're going to have to cook your food with electricity. What do you think is going to happen to electric prices when the burden goes skyrocketing, and everybody has to pay that premium because nobody will have access to gas, natural gas, coal, fossil fuels? It's just incredible to think about how that's going to influence you personally in New York State. If you have a gas furnace, chances are, if that breaks down, you can't replace it with another gas furnace. It boggles the mind.
This is the New York Heat Act that you're referring to, which might be one of the most nonsensical pieces of legislation to come out of Albany, where you're taking clean, reliable natural gas and replacing it with uncertain power sources from renewable energy at a cost of 5 times more expensive per unit. So if you're going to move into a new home and it would cost you $200 in the wintertime, which is a reasonable number to heat your house in the wintertime on natural gas, that's going to cost you $1,000 a month on all electric. And mind you, these heat pumps that are used to generate electricity in the wintertime, they freeze up. They're unreliable. Natural gas, when we had the winter storm in December of 2022, 99% reliability during that incredible storm. There may not have been electricity to turn our lights on, but guess what? Our homes were warm at least because we had natural gas to heat our homes. So there is the capability for us to see a solution, and that solution is to suspend these goals that we have for New York's Green New Deal, otherwise known as the Climate Act. We have the capacity to do that, and I give a lot of credit to Donna DeCarolis from National Fuel Gas, former president of National Fuel Gas, and Dennis Elsenbeck, used to be the regional director for National Grid. They submitted a letter to the New York State Public Service Commission and says it's within our authority in the organization that they're a part of to suspend these unrealistic climate goals in New York State. That's the first thing they should do to make sense of improving this policy, and let's get some real reforms and some real reliability on our electricity going forward.
Just think about you having to heat your home and run your appliances on solar power from October through February or March in Buffalo. Think about that for a while, and think about that while we go to a break. And we'll come back and talk a little bit more about these things that are going to give you a headache. Maybe we can offer an aspirin, and stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back to The Big Picture. My guest is Ed Rath, and we're talking about some maddening things that are happening in New York State and nationally. One of the things in the news recently is Texas is reapportioning some of their seats, and that has raised tremendous complaints from California and Illinois and New York and Massachusetts that are the worst offenders in reapportioning.
Indeed.
It's like, don't do as I say, do as I tell you you should do, because if you follow what I did, then it doesn't look good. It just, now New York State wants to, eliminate more Republican districts, just as they did with your district.
That's right.
And where would the state go from there? I mean, will Democrats be the one party going forward that dictates everything?
Well, let me step back a little bit in history to what you referenced about my state Senate seat, which had been held together for 6 decades, basically unifying Amherst, Clarence, and Newstead, going eastward into all of Genesee County. And those were called communities of interest. And then when they went through their 3rd set of maps that they drew over a couple of years, that district was eliminated and folded in with the city of Buffalo. And so we have now a real disconnect with the interests of Amherst and other communities, Grand Island and Tonawanda, now being represented by a Democrat from the city of Buffalo. But what they're proposing to do is potentially redistrict once again in New York State, because Kathy Hochul says she needs to fight fire with what's happening in other states. Well, no, what you need to do is adhere to the supreme law of the land in New York State, which is our Constitution. And our Constitution specifically prohibits any additional redistricting this decade, because they've already done it, number one, so many times, and number two, a court has already stepped in and has said to the state legislature, no, you're violating the state Constitution, and you have one chance at redrawing these maps. You can't do it again for any more mid-decade redistricting. And let me tell you what's very important is the rules of Texas are appropriate and drawn up and put in place for the people of Texas. The rules of Ohio are put in place for the state constitution for the people of Ohio. Same with New York. That's what an elected official's responsibility is. Number one is to adhere to and to defend and to protect the Constitution. And in this case, we've seen both majorities in the Assembly and the Senate turn their backs on the Constitution over a partisan political agenda for redistricting. And this is inconsistent with what the people of New York want to see, because we had a referendum 11 years ago which called for an independent process for redistricting. It was approved by 58% of New Yorkers, and it came about at that time with a bipartisan state legislature, Republican state Senate, Democrat state Assembly, and a Democrat governor. They came together and said, let's get partisanship out of redistricting, and let's have an independent group carry out that's the work that needs to be done by them. And unfortunately now, this is what we've reached into, is a hyper-political agenda from the majorities in the state legislature trying to violate the state constitution.
Well, you know, in general, the Democrat Party has moved to the left. At least that's where the voices are. You know, I believe that it's a small minority of leaders in the Democrat Party that are actually very far left, but they have the loudest voices, and I think they command the direction. And I'm not quite sure why. I always look to the why of the situation. How can a small minority of leaders dictate far leftist, like Mondami in New York City? Mm-hmm. How can socialism creep forward in a country that's 80% against socialism?
I think there's two answers to your question. I think first, it's they have the loudest microphone, and this is the Working Families Party and the progressive movement in the state of New York. Zoran Mondami is right now the #1 example of that. They're organized. And they have a very loud microphone, and that microphone many times is being exponentially increased through the mainstream media, carrying out their agenda, carrying out their talking points, carrying out what their priorities are. But understand this, the Working Families Party and the progressive wing of the Democrat Party is the most organized wing within the Democrat Party. But if you think about it, and if you really want to get down to brass tacks, who is the leader of the Democrat Party right now across New York State and across the country? There isn't a leader. So they're rudderless. The only rudder that they have is being pushed or being directed by the Working Families progressive agenda in New York State, and that's in touch with the priorities of liberal New York City, but it's out of touch with the priorities of all the rest of New York State.
Well, you know, I've been in media all my adult life, and it kind of embarrasses me, the direction that media has gone. You know, journalism used to be nonpartisan. It used to be objective. We told you what was happening, and you decide whether it's good or bad. You be the independent judge of the direction that it's going. That's not the case anymore. In preparation for this show, I got on the internet and I wanted to do some research on some of the policies that Trump has installed, going against crime, okay, cracking down on crime, the transgender men competing with women in sports, closing the border, 7 wars, Pakistan and India, Thailand and Cambodia. I mean, the list goes on, the Congo and Rwanda. And he's kind of put a stop to all that, okay? And Social Security, people over the age of 150 getting Social Security, illegal aliens getting Social Security, the border, all these issues. You get online and you do a search for the economy or Trump, solving wars or Social Security, and all you'll get is stories that say, well, that's not verified. We really don't know that there were people over 150 years old getting Social Security. We don't know that that's true. We don't know that, he stopped wars, but they're threatening to go back, or they're, accusing each other of violating the treaty, or it's all negative. Everything that you see, with very few exceptions, is a negative outlook on what Trump has accomplished or is trying to accomplish.
Imagine all the issues you just talked about in a bell curve, if you will. And a bell curve obviously has a very wide middle, and it has the tails, if you will, that are at the extremes. Well, you have 10% on one side, 10% on the other side, and 80% in the middle. Every single one of those issues is in the middle of that bell curve, where the people reside and where their priorities reside and where what they want to see out of their country. Those are the issues that Trump was able to identify, successfully articulate, and win the presidency. Mind you, he also won the popular vote, which is a very, very important point, because many times the Electoral College has been criticized, unrightfully so, but it has been criticized. Trump also won the popular vote because he was able to identify middle-class American priorities, principles, and values. And he's delivering on that as well right now. And, politics in many ways is, what have you done for me lately? And you know what? I give Trump and his team a tremendous amount of credit for continuing to deliver on the priorities for the American people. But those are also the priorities for the people of the state of New York. And I think what you're going to see in next year's elections for governor, as well as the state Senate and the state Assembly, is a recorrecting, if you will, or a more of to the middle of that 80% that we're talking about of those issues. And Trump is on the correct side of all of those issues. And therein lies the opportunity for us to bring some balance and some checks and balances back to government, because we have single party control in New York State, and that's very dangerous for either party to be in single party control.
Well, we've got about 2 minutes left, and I think the key to what you've just said is reintroducing into power some common sense. And basically, common sense is not the agenda of a lot of people who are in charge, because there's more behind the scenes going on that would be counterintuitive. The energy thing, getting rid of gas, to heat your home. Common sense doesn't go for that. But behind the scenes, there are people there with an agenda. Climate change. They've been saying we only have a few years left for 40 years. And climate has not changed in 40 years. I've done stories on this before. I've interviewed people from the National Weather Service. I've interviewed scientists. They say it's all bull. There's no climate change. There's no demonstrable way that the climate is going in one direction or another. It fluctuates, and it always has. Common sense is not being followed. And it's because of something going on in the background.
I couldn't agree with you more. And in many ways, what's coming out of Albany is devoid of common sense right now. They talk the talk, and they say that we're going to work on affordability, and we're going to try to make New York State more affordable. And then what do? We see utility companies massively increase their rates because of New York State's their Green New Deal agenda. They talk about how we're going to, prioritize crime and public safety, when they do the exact opposite, when they prioritize criminals over law-abiding citizens. They talk about how we're going to create jobs when New York State is unfriendly to business. So their agenda is devoid of common sense. They say one thing and do the exact opposite.
We have about a minute left, but I'm going to ask the pertinent question, and that is, how far does this go? You know, if it's one party rule and they have this agenda and it forces people out of the state, how can this be sustained if we lose more and more businesses, more and more people, the state infrastructure suffers, the taxes go up? How far can this go?
You know, I think we've reached a tipping point. I really, truly believe that, because people are realizing, number one, with their pocketbooks, what New York State is doing to them. But also, the number one priority, aside from pocketbook issues, is personal safety. So you have to look at the fact that if people don't feel safe and if it's not affordable, they're going to say, why would I stay here in New York? And now it's the responsibility of the Republicans, quite honestly, to put these issues and these messages out there so people understand where we're coming from. The Senate Minority Conference and the Assembly Minority Conference have done a tremendous job of providing realistic alternatives. That's what we need. And I have 3 kids. I'm concerned none of them will settle here in Western New York. They're all either college or just post-college age. And I think every parent is concerned about that going forward.
I certainly am as well. And who knows where this is going to go. It's been a frustrating conversation, to say the least. That's where we are, in a frustrating situation. New York State, and you know, I don't think that you guys are powerless. You are voters, and if you think things through, if you look at things with substance, you can make a difference. It's difficult because the system is kind of rigged, but it's not impossible. Anyway, take what you will from this, but think through where things are going and how things happen, and use your vote, you know, to the best of your ability. Thank you for watching The Big Picture. Thanks to Ed Rath for being my guest.
Thank you, Phil. Great to be here.
And, you know, we'll continue with these subjects going forward. Thank you again for watching. I get a lot of comments on people saying it's informative, and I really appreciate the feedback. Thanks for watching WBBZ. We're your local TV station, and we count on you. So we'll see you next time on WBBZ and The Big Picture.